The human experience relies strongly on growth. One day, you are a baby, the next you're a teenager who is exposed to sudden weird physical bodily changes, and then bam, you're in your 20s and have to find a job, marry and have kids. Not to mention what lies beyond our 20s where we then live to grow old and die. Interspersed in this cycle of growth are different phases of change, and change is one thing Adventure Time as a series handles well. In today's video, I will talk about the episode Walnuts and Rain, one that has changed so much in meaning from my first viewing as a child, showing how great the show is at telling complex stories in ways that make them interesting across all age groups. Before we get into it, do well to like and subscribe to the channel as this helps greatly. Also, don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories about the episode in the comments below. I love to hear more perspectives on what is truly a great episode. So the episode kicks off with Finn and Jake talking about an adventure they just had off-screen. In this prior adventure, there is talk of a salsa cloud and cactus, two things that don't make sense together but perfectly fit the mold of the wacky in Adventure Time. We then cut to our heroes making plans on what they will do once home when Finn all of a sudden slips and falls through a hole. Jake tries to go after his friend, but walks into a branch and falls into a different hole. The two different holes are revealed to be entrances into the huge kingdom, one being a crack in the roof and the other being a chimney of some sort. Our heroes, both unconscious, are helped by two interesting characters who we will explore further in the video. Upon awakening, Finn is convinced by a green humanoid character called King Huge to stay and wait for Jake to rescue him. In what I perceive as a less convincing fashion, Jake is also convinced to wait for Finn to rescue him by Bill, or as he calls himself 7718 or 7 for short. 7 tells Jake that he may have been falling for weeks as he was unconscious when he fell through and should not go out of the pit or he may starve. Jake listens and spends most of his time in the episode in this chimney, looking more like a bottomless pit with a skinny bear. King Huge is however supplied with lots of food by servants he calls food boys, and with these treats, gets Finn to stay until the cuckoo clock goes off in an hour. Finn, after seeing the much-awaited performance of the clock, decides to leave and is then kidnapped by the king who would rather he stay and watch the next clock performance. Finn then concocts what is a really weird plan to escape, but changes his mind after only the first phase of the escape plan worked. Our hero's new focus is now to destroy the clock, a goal upon which he succeeds even with the food boys and the winded king trying their best to stop them. The clock tumbles into the boiling pot, causing Jake and 7 to fall down the chimney now without warm air to support their floating. Finn, now in the clutches of the king, is freed by Jake who makes a long arm and punches the king. The last scene is of our heroes and 7 making it out into the land and walking away from the huge kingdom. A great episode interspersed with slapstick comedy. Walnuts and Rain is an episode that has a whole host of possible meanings when one takes into account the many Easter eggs and potential perspectives of the episode's many characters. The first key perspective to consider is that of King Huge. This green humanoid character is actually a character of misery. He is a cautionary tale of the consequences of instant gratification and a bubbled lifestyle. In many aspects, the King Huge is you, the average individual hooked on social media. He has servants who fulfill his every wish, giving him food whenever he pleases. In the first part of the episode, we get a glimpse of just how much he eats when he is close-eyed and having food tossed into his mouth until Finn gets his attention. Again, the very fact that the bear might have been floating for years, only supported by the heat from the king's stove, goes to show that his pleasure never stopped, as every moment, the food boys had something cooking for him. The food boys, though loyal servants, are neither family nor friends to the king. In a story, he tells Finn, one food boy is said to have been wedged in a cuckoo clock, one for which the king is an avid fan, but also certainly a tomb for the food boy who would have been crushed by the mechanical wizardry the clock was made of. The king tells this story with glee, likely shadowing his eventual symbolic stepping on one food boy, slipping in consequence. The food boys are his servants and his doom, feeding him with the very food that now traps him, with his only other hope for happiness lying in the representations of a possible life scene in the displays of the cuckoo clock. The clock first shows a man shooting a fowl or bird, then two beings hammering an anvil, and then what looks to be a woman and her two young crying. Much like the modern man, the king forms a parasocial connection to these displays while having none really in his life. Like a man who chooses prawn over real intimacy, watching football over being himself an athlete, drugs instead of real-life exhilarating experiences, the king decides to exchange what is difficult yet more fulfilling with that instantly gratifies. It is a sad manifestation of the traps of the modern day. That is why we see the word vice on a cereal box at the beginning of the episode. The show asks that we reflect on what we would do if in this king's position, a situation for most in developed countries that is eerily similar. The king enjoys his trap of instant gratification, actively kidnapping Finn, whose very wish to leave threatens the very foundation of the bubble he lives in, one where all his desires are fulfilled instantly, despite his brief exaltation of the virtues of patience. There are many in a modern society whose very identity predicates on the validation of others, where any objection to such is considered violent and even dangerous, a sentiment held by the king. But even as implied by the name of the clock, those who decide to live then in a life of incessant gratification are indeed insane. This episode brilliantly juxtaposes the well-fed king with the bear called Seven. He embodies the vice of complacency in more ways than one. The bear, likely actually called Bill, decides to remain on the raft for what seems like years, only sustained by the walnuts and rain that fall through the hole. On the surface of it, Bill should be doing all he can to get out. After all, a diet of only walnuts and the occasional rain could hardly sustain anyone. He is in abject poverty. But alas, he chooses to remain where he is because of a lack of ambition which has him fixated on two dark possibilities. The first option would be to let go of the raft and fall to what he thinks then as a bottomless pit. That is an eerie option, the stuff of nightmares. If the pit is bottomless, he falls till he either succumbs to hunger, fear, or thirst and dies. If it has a bottom, it would likely be pitch black, possibly creeping with deadly monsters and anything but a soft cushion to break his fall. The bear's fear of falling is based on a real possibility that should make him want to climb out as soon as possible. We see the raft consistently sank throughout the episode, drawing out his eventual fall into the abyss. Even still he stays, choosing not to risk climbing out of the pit in case he should get hungry and starve to death. I ask myself what he looks forward to given that he has little to lose. Surely starving to death on the way to freedom should be better than a few walnuts and rain he gets from time to time. Why not risk it all when you have little, to begin with? The bear is a representation of those who are not only poor in reality but in mind. Poverty is a crippling condition laced with pain, starvation, and apathy. However, more deadly is this disease once it transcends the physical and infects the mind. Bill does nothing to improve his situation, showing a lack of ambition at every turn. The show hints strongly at the possible cause of this lack of ambition and ties in strongly with the glooming reality of many men and people in developed countries and Western societies. We see a growing tear in what is considered masculine and allowable. Compliment a woman and you may be labeled sexist. Don't compliment women and you are a misogynist. Do nothing and you are an incel. Most young men in the West can't win for losing. Their growing response to these mixed signals is to go away from the relationships. How does this tie into the bear? Hang on for a minute. The bear is seen to have no friends or family. He speaks about getting hot dogs when he is asked by Finn what he will do next now he has his freedom. If anything, there is no evidence of anyone looking for him, nor does he have a companion in the pit until Jake arrives. He is elated to have Jake, but it suffices to say he had no such meaningful relationships up at the surface, for which starvation and pain would have been a worthy sacrifice to reclaim. In the end, the bear is a manifestation of the sad lives that many MGTOW and black-pilled people are bound to face once they are unable to find meaning in their loneliness and have no one but themselves to strive to help. Life is cozy until it is not, and while many of the relationship-starved men are opting to self-delete at an alarming rate, the real danger lies ahead once the parasocial relationships run their course and there is nothing but sorrow for the lonely. This rings true for the female side of the aisle also, a truth many find out too little, too late. I believe eventually, King Huge would transition to becoming like the bear, filled with misery and loneliness once he realizes the gravity of his situation. Even still, Bill or Seven remains a cautionary tale of the dangers of complacency and shows how fulfilling relationships can often be the necessary catalyst out of a nasty pit. There is not much to say about the perspectives of Jake and Finn. The dog is used mainly as a plot device during the episode to understand Bill, while Finn's fight for freedom forces the king to confront his bubble. However, there is much to be said about the many food boys who are an essential plot point of the episode. According to the Adventure Time Wiki fandom page, the food boys have been portrayed in the game Adventure Time, Finn and Jake Investigations as, quote, wild berry people cursed by a magic bucket that belonged to the late Billy, unquote. Whether or not that statement is canon, we can see the food boys serve as some sort of slave labor for King Huge. They do everything the king asks and serve him ceaselessly. In a stunning bit of storytelling, we see a quote in Toil, "We crimber" etched on the cuckoo clock. Although I could not find any meaningful meaning to the word crimber, that, itself, shows that the word is of no meaning, even echoing louder the sentiment that the food boys' work is meaningless. The existence of the food boys forces us to only grapple with questions of slave labor and how it helps facilitate the relatively easy lives we live as Westerners. The very phones and devices with which we connect to the internet are often assembled in sweatshops and concentration camps around the world. The very chocolate we are fond of is largely made in West Africa, where Ivorian and Ghanaian children, who are denied an education, slave to prepare the cocoa beans for processing by large corporations like Nestle. Like the Ivorian, Ghanaian, or Chinese slave labor, the food boys work only to be met with next to little compensation. They are not hailed as heroes or even paid well, sometimes entirely forgotten when we wear our standard Nike shoes or drink hot cocoa. Adventure Time forces us to think about these uncomfortable concepts, but for many of us, just like Finn and Jake, there is little we can do to rescue the slaves. Leaving the den, Jake only has Finn and Bill on his back, leaving lots of questions about the future of the huge kingdom and its food boys. We would like to think that our heroes freed them, but there is so much to be said for what independence truly means when the bulk of life's experiences lie in working with and for someone or something else. The unassuming episode carries a lot of hefty concepts and themes to explore. With questions of instant gratifications, isolation, indecision, and the state of the labor force placed under the transparent bushel of comedy and a happy ending, Adventure Time crafts one of the most interesting and telling episodes of its catalog. I actually loved this episode and ask all who can revisit it to expound on the very themes it purports with caution. Thank you.